Hey guys, Ryan Murphy here, and I'm back with another review with my low definition camera. Just trying to send some thoughts out there. If you haven't seen my first two reviews of Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk, the point of this sort of series is to talk about film structure a little bit and kind of go more in depth in terms of reviews, to sort of look at what the story was the filmmakers were trying to tell, how they tried to accomplish that through the structure, and where they did well in that, and how they could have done better. Now, with the latter, with Iron Man 2, that's obviously there's more so that they could have done better. This is definitely considered Marvel's sort of big first misstep. I mean, I know there's conflicting thoughts out there on the Incredible Hulk, and at the end of the day, it's really not great or terrible. It's an action movie, but this was sort of the one that came out that everyone was like, oh no, because Iron Man was so good. I mean, Iron Man was really a heck of a movie for Marvel Studios to sort of debut with and just sort of bust open that door, and they're still proud of that movie to this day. And so the sequel was very heavily hyped, and when you're talking about sequels, you can go Empire Strikes Back, or you can go Iron Man 2. I mean, it's definitely kind of a flip of the coin. um, and obviously a lot of people feel they misstepped here. Thankfully they got back on track, not necessarily in the Iron Man series, because I would say this is not as bad as Iron Man 3, but Marvel Studios overall got back on track. That's what I'll say. So in order to talk about this film and what it could have done better, we have to talk about what the point is. What's the point? What's the overall goal? And this film, the A and the C. If you haven't watched my first two videos, there's the A and the C, and the B is how they get there. The A and the C is what's the story the filmmakers want to tell? Where's the character in the beginning versus where he is at the end? And in that respect, this film was very much influenced by the Demon in the Bottle storyline of Iron Man, where Iron Man, collapsed into alcoholism due to, a villain's just messing with his personal fortunes and with his business, and he just sort of fell apart. And because of his, lapsing into alcoholism, James Rhodes actually did become Iron Man. And this was years before he actually took up the mantle of War Machine, which would become what he's known as. So with this film, they just sort of made him War Machine, obviously, which is where we all knew it was headed. And where I think the film erred, just doing a broad overview first, is being too comical and not actually digging into alcoholism or anything, but just sort of it doesn't play very well in the film, and we'll get more into that. But I like the opening of this film. This is very much trying to establish, when you watch the opening of this film, that they're establishing, like, where is the character in the beginning, and the answer is on top of the world. You know, if we show him on top of the world, everything's going right for him. He's has these he has this grand festival going on, and everyone loves Iron Man. Then he goes to the Senate hearings, and kind of schools them. But we also see that there's a little bit of trouble in paradise. There's something wrong with him, and that's that he's obviously suffering from poisoning from the material that's inside of his chest. That's actually the thing that's keeping him alive is also killing him, is what they say. The palladium core. So, but then what happens is it all comes crashing down. So all that stuff in the beginning where they show how life is going good for him is just kind of to contrast when everything comes crashing down. And I think that's sort of the point the filmmakers were going for. Is, yeah, it's great that Tony Stark becomes a hero, kind of, in the first film. I mean, he just does right. He does the right thing and builds the Iron Man armor and wins a couple battles. But and then it's cool for him when he's on top of the world because of it. But is he still a hero when it all comes crashing down? And the answer at first is no. And he has to sort of overcome his personal follies. That he's still not a saint, nor do I think he ever will be. But he's still pretty kind of weak, and doesn't really do the right thing when the chips are down, at least at first. And this is meant to be a story of how he does do that, and I'm not sure it accomplishes that very well. So there you go. I kind of told you the first act. Like we talked about, acts 1, 2, and 3. In the first act, it's basically him being on top of the world until Ivan Vanko comes, because part of the reason that he is on top of the world is, like I said, he schooled the Senate hearing because of the concern over whether or not these weapons can exist anywhere else, and he's saying no, they can't. And here someone else has them, and so Ivan Vanko kind of rips a hole in Tony Stark's world. Plus, he also is realizing for the first time that he's not going to be able to cure himself. He thought he was, and he's not. He's realizing that it's hope's fading for that. So those are the two things that sort of combine, and stuff starts to crash down around him. So that's all kind of good for the first act. It's where in the second act it doesn't really work, because he just sort of parties one night, and then James Rhodes comes in and takes the suit, and it's a comedic scene. It's not. It's not. It should have been darker. Like that's where it should have started to go dark. Instead, it's still played for laughs. And Jon Favreau kind of encouraged a lot of ad libbing on the first Iron Man movie, and that worked really well. But lightning didn't strike twice, because this film, even from the beginning, it's kind of annoying. Like people are always talking over each other, and there's just a lot of jokes going on. This is what I call Transformer syndrome. We all like humor in films and humor in our action films, but when it goes over the top or when it becomes intrusive, it doesn't flow organically. It's just sort of constant and unwelcome. That's what I call Transformer syndrome. So other than the five Transformers films as is, what two of the biggest offenders have been Iron Man 2 and Iron Man 3, where it just sort of it's not flowing, it's not organic. People are talking over each other, and it gets in the way of a lot of stuff because Rhodes comes in, they have a fight, to the 80s song, and then he goes later on he goes to Pepper, and we'll talk about that. But I guess that's sort of your second act. That kind of is. And then the third act, we talked about how there's a dark moment at the end of the second act. In the third act, there's some sort of solution. Well, Nick Fury shows up on Iron Man's doorstep for the first time in the film and says, "Hey, your dad, by the way, has a solution to your problem, which I've known exists." I guess maybe he just learned that from his spy. To be fair, I guess he may have only recently learned that from Natasha, who was spying on him. But he's letting him know for the first time that his dad had a new element that he was trying to create, that the technology to create wouldn't exist for some time, and here it is, and it'll be just the right thing for your core. That's not actually as coincidental as people might make it out to be, because again, the palladium core in Tony's chest was built from the same technology that he was continuing to develop from the Tesseract, as we later learned that he got at the end of the first Avenger. So it's just sort of a continuation of that same technology, and Tony now realizes there's something better that won't be killing him. What kind of was not palatable for people is the fact that he hides the key to the new element inside the freaking amusement park thing, and it's really weird, and he has to do some bullshit national treasure hunt to find it, and people didn't really respond well to that. What I don't like, well, let me continue on further, is that he says, well, you're gonna stay put, you're gonna stay in your house until you find this new thing that will solve all your problems. And yeah, and then he literally just runs out in the next scene. Like Coulson just threatened what would happen if he tried to leave, and then he leaves problem free. And then he comes back, and Coulson's like, "I heard you breached the perimeter." And he goes to meet with Pepper, and it's a comedic scene. It's played for laughs. There's people talking over each other. There's this joke with this one with the thing on her desk, and it just doesn't work. And yeah. And I guess you could say that's actually, I suppose you might say that's the break into 3, because that's when he's finds some sort of solution. There's some sort of hope. I don't want to say it's the huzzah moment. So this film does kind of fly in the face a little bit of that 3-act thing, which isn't necessarily a bad thing at all. I mean, films don't have to follow that per se. But the point is that when he has that conversation with Pepper, that should be at the heart of the film. And there's a few problems with this. One, Tony's still a jerk at this point. He doesn't really learn from his mistakes. He literally, the morning after his little drunken rant, it's one night, and Rhodes is like, "Well, I guess I'll take the Iron Man machine." And the next morning, he's still a jerk. He doesn't show any remorse. And Nick Fury comes up to him and gives him the solution to all his problems. And then he goes to Pepper, creating a giant plot hole by even crossing the perimeter. And yeah, and then he has a scene that's not emotionally effective. So this all could be done a lot better. First of all, you have to have some agency in Tony's part that he is truly changing, not just when things go right for him, he does well. Because that's literally kind of the point of the movie, I thought, was that the Tony Stark in this movie does really well when things are going his way. When things don't go his way, he does not do so well. So the change that he should go through is that he actually can take responsibility for the actions that he took when things weren't going well. But instead, he really doesn't become a better person until Nick Fury puts the solution in his lap. So what I thought would be better was if it would solve a lot of problems if he just went to Pepper before Nick Fury came to him, and he had that thing where he tries to apologize, she rejects him, nobody likes him at this point, and that is when he starts to try to do better, and then Nick Fury comes in and helps him out. And then you would also avoid the plot hole with Coulson. I mean, I don't understand why they made it the way they did. But there are other things about the movie that I do like in terms of structure. I like the whole Mickey Rourke's character is interesting. I like the fact that the film's about legacy in a certain sense. It's about the fact that someone else could make this because someone else is a genius like him and is the son of a genius like him who actually helped make the arc reactor. And there's a nice little aspect where there's like, this is the yin to his yang. This is the other guy who's the son of a genius who worked on the initial arc reactor. That's a nice touch. I like how he comes in, does the damage to Tony's life, and then leaves the picture as far as Tony's concerned because he's presumed dead, but he's really working with this other guy, and then kind of comes in again at the end to try and mess up his life again. But this time Tony's going to do better. He stopped him the first time, but he's not going to let him destroy his life this much. That's the point. And I like all that. I do. As far as his character, it's sort of an amalgam of two different characters from the comics. There's Anton Vanko, who was the Crimson Dynamo, a Russian bad guy who worked for the Russian government, I believe. And then Whiplash, who was a disgruntled Stark employee who used his whips and stuff. So his name was Ivan Vanko, son of Anton Vanko. I don't like that. I wish they would have just called him Ivan Vanko. That way he is a character from the comic. He may have been amalgamated with another character, like Whiplash, but you can still say he is one of them. You know what I mean? And then he should have actually worn red at the end. So as you can see, there's good and bad there. It does create an origin story and an entry point for War Machine and even Black Widow. And then in the end, they all have, and again, like I said, it plays a little bit with the 3-act structure, because in the last two movies I reviewed, it's like you definitely have a climax that is the third act. Here, it's like you could argue the third act is anything past the point where Nick Fury shows up, right? But the point where it's really huzzah, where it's not necessarily right after a dark moment. It is right near the end, right near the very climactic fight scene where Tony puts the new core chest in. And I like that moment because that's it's kind of an exciting moment. He gets everything ready. He's well, okay, yeah, sure. You could say that's a false victory, right? He's like, I've got my new chest ready, and then the bad guy calls, well, I'm going to ruin your life, and then he's like, and then that's a really exciting moment to me. So that's a plus. So obviously there's some things they could have done better. I don't know if they, it's much like with Thor. I think the timetable they had to work with in terms of the plot of the film is a little bit of a struggle because he only gets like one night to act like a drunken jerk. So I'm not sure if that was entirely fixable or what they could have done differently to make him actually show a pattern of that kind of behavior. The way the film is structured, where he's really good and then he falls off the wagon and then becomes kind of a douchebag. It certainly would have worked better if it was more than just I'm going to act like a drunken jerk one night and everything falls apart for me. But there you go. I mean, there's a lot of boring thoughts on Iron Man 2. It's not the best movie, but it tried to tell a certain kind of story. I don't believe it succeeded at all. But there it is, and we'll be back with our review of Thor. So thanks a lot, guys.